Everyone, welcome to another episode of Pensive Politics with Mr. Watson. I am most certainly your host, as always, Christian Watson, and with me today I have one of my good friends, someone who I think is a hero in his own right. I think is someone who really just revolutionizes, or that's even a word, revolutionizes sort of the debate space and the public discussion about certain topics. Michael Moreno. He is a YouTuber. He is a sort of renegade debater, I should say, a stalwart individual like myself, and he is someone who I genuinely believe will be on the forefront of the cultural change in the world, if the change goes the way we want it to go, and that will be the topic of today's discussion. So before I go any further, Michael, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me here and for those very kind words. I have very similar thoughts about you. You'll definitely be successful in this. So.
Oh my, you're very kind. You're very kind. I appreciate it. All humility here. All humility is. Emerson said something about how whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist, right? And that you have to ensure and speak that the truth you understand in your heart so loudly, so it be the universal truth. And in my opinion, all I'm trying to do is speak the universal truth to the high heavens and cement it into the minds of people so they can finally accept what reality is. And that's what you're trying to do as well. So I really do appreciate it. Speaking of reality, speaking of truth, and speaking of high heaven screaming, because you got a lot of that over what you did, the Supreme Court, for those who do not know, recently penned in my opinion, unfortunate decision, which essentially outlawed, quote unquote, LGBTQ employment discrimination on the basis that LGBTQ people have a right to someone else's property. Essentially, they didn't say that, but that's essentially what it was.
The logic behind it.
That's logic
the
behind
implication.
it. That's logic behind it. And being a gay person myself, I obviously have nothing against other gay folks, but I do think that this sort of idea that you have something, yet you have a right to someone's property, is just absolutely absurd. So essentially, Judge Justice Neil Gorsuch, who is one of Trump's appointees, he decided in his ruling that it is a manifest harm. I'm paraphrasing here. It's a manifest harm to LGBTQ people to discriminate against them in the workplace, and therefore it is illegal to do that. Michael here he produced a very scathing video about that entire decision, where he went through the entire terminology, phraseology. I was listening to it on the way back from work one day, and I was just sitting there in absolute astonishment how other folks are so confused over quite intuitive arguments. So, Michael, why don't you walk through what your arguments are and tell us a little bit why you made that video and what the reception has been you've received for that video.
Yeah, to summarize the video, I start out by making it clear that I'm not anti-gay or trans or anything like that. I'm not a fan of discrimination. I don't think people should discriminate. But what I think people should do and what they should be allowed to do are not the same thing. And that's the distinction that the majority of people don't consider. So I give examples like, I don't think people should watch porn. I don't think people should do drugs. I don't think people should eat junk food. But all of these things don't harm me, so they should be allowed. So that's the mechanism we should look to when creating laws. It shouldn't be the harm principle, right? The non-aggression principle. Basically, to put it simply, if an action takes away the liberty of someone else, it isn't considered a manifestation of or an instance of their liberty, right? So that's basically the argument. I lay out that framework, and then I handle the common responses as well. If you discriminate, you are harming me, and that's predicated on a misunderstanding between the difference between not helping someone and harming them, right? Again, that's another distinction that people collapse. So to make this clear, if I don't give money to a homeless person, that's obviously not the same as me taking money from them. If I don't donate, that's not the same as me stealing. And so in the same way, if I don't hire someone, that's not the same as me taking something. It's to put it mathematically, the lack of +1 is not -1, it's just 0. The lack of a positive is not a negative, it's just neutral. And so when we apply that to businesses, okay, someone needs a job. I'm someone who also exists and I have a job. Currently, the scale is 0. They don't have a job, I haven't hired them. Okay, I hire them, so now we're at +1 in terms of my action towards them. I am engaging in a voluntary contract with them, so it's +1. I then say, okay, I don't want to hire you anymore. I don't want to employ you anymore, so I fire you. okay, I take them from +1 to 0, or rather, I take my actions to +1 to 0, but it's still only at 0, so it's not a harm. So in the same way, if parents are giving me money, they are currently positively affecting me. And it's not about my state. It's not about how good my life is. It's about their actions towards me. Their actions towards me are technically positive. If they just stop giving me money, regardless of what happens to my life, regardless of if I fall into poverty, they haven't harmed me. They've just stopped helping me. And this is entirely consistent. And like you said, this is a very intuitive principle. And so the fact that so many people don't understand it is pretty shocking and disheartening. Not really shocking because
Not shocking, disheartening.
It's not shocking. It's disheartening
because we have because both of us, you and me, Michael, we have a sort of higher order mechanism that pushes our actions into the material world and manifests desire within our hearts to see a dynamic change in people. And all that change would be is reevaluating the narrative surrounding how you see yourself and how you see society, and pinning that importance that you have, that value that you have for society back onto yourself, and then using yourself as a gateway to understand the universal truth very simply. And the truth is, of course, you are not entitled to someone else's capital.
Yeah.
And now the way you're outlining this is quite interesting, because politics is not, and argumentation in general is not really thought of as a mathematical thing by a lot of common folk, but even by a lot of people who might be experienced with debate. But, as we understand, a lot of people who are experienced with debate aren't actually doing debate. They're doing performances, as you saw in your collegiate debate thing. So what would you say to someone who says empathy is a key ingredient in social relations and individual interactions, and sort of ensuring the non-aggression principle is upheld faithfully and fruitfully? And so you cannot necessarily apply a strictly rigid logical calculus to the issue of someone getting a job or not, because empathy is involved in there, because that is the difference potentially between someone's livelihood or someone's premature death. What would you say to that? Not that I agree with that argument, because I don't, but what would you say to that?
So, two things. The first is that I'd say whether we're dealing with morality or science or mathematics, we're dealing with conclusions. Anytime you make a claim, that by definition is a conclusion. To say murder is wrong, that's a conclusion. And the nature of what conclusions are means we're dealing with logic. Because in order to have a conclusion, you need to have a premise that supports it. If we make a scientific conclusion, we need evidence. If we make a moral conclusion that murder is wrong, we need to provide a reason why.
Right.
And that relationship is what defines logic. Logic is about inputs and outputs. And so it's my fundamental belief that everything that is dealing with any type of conclusion, any type of input-output system is logical. So when we're talking about morality, a lot of people have empathy at the basis of their morality. What about them? Like, well, a lot of people believe the earth is flat. Just because people have beliefs or systems of thinking doesn't mean that it's valid.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's say your moral system is that murder is wrong, and the reason why is because, well, I just feel like it. That's an invalid system. Yeah. So in formal logic, invalid means that the conclusion is not supported by the premise.
Right.
You feeling something is bad doesn't translate to it actually being bad. Emotions don't confer truth. So if you're going to have any type of meaningful moral argument, you need to give me an actual reason that supports the conclusion. Emotion's not one of them. Absolutely. So I guess the double bind there is either you use logic for morality, or why should anyone care about your morality?
Now,
they shouldn't.
If we arrest that statement and we put a bulwark around it, sort of a conceptual bulwark around it, and we arrest it from the logical argumentation framework that we understand is true, the sort of, conclusions, input, outputs, the sort of idea, the operations of logic and argumentation. But if we arrest that point and we leave it by itself on its own merits, do you think empathy has a active role in certain social engagements, or in social engagements in general?
Sure. Yeah. And I like I said, I think that discrimination is wrong. I think that and along the same lines, I think that if someone's starving, you're able to help them out to get out of poverty and to, just
you shouldn't be compelled. You shouldn't be compelled.
Yeah, you should do it, but you shouldn't be forced to.
Right.
That's the argument.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so, you really debunked a lot of the arguments. There was this guy who challenged you And and so tell us, how did that challenge go about? Tell us about this guy who challenged you, and how did you find out about the challenge? He actually made a video response to you, and in my opinion, he didn't fare very well against the video recorded version of you. I think
Yeah.
the actual debate was much better. I think both of you did a good job. So tell us a little bit about how that response happened and what the immediate response afterwards was, because you even said in the video, "I'm going to lose subscribers over this."
Mhm.
So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah. So someone in my Discord server posted a video that was like, Michael Moreno thinks the Supreme Court's ruling is wrong, and I think he's wrong. So I clicked on it. It was from this YouTuber slash streamer named Surus the Skeptic. And basically what happened, it was an excerpt from a stream he did, I think on Twitch, maybe it was YouTube, where he got to my video and he was going to criticize it because I guess his followers told him, hey, check out this video, let us know what you think. And so, it was about 40 minutes long, but he only got to 3 minutes of my video. And that's because what he would do is he would listen to about 5 seconds at a time and then pause the video and make a criticism that I was literally about to respond to in like the next 10 to 30 seconds. So if you go and listen to that video, most of his arguments were like, well, yeah, Michael, I agree with you. You can't harm people. I agree with you that people should be able to do whatever they want to do so long as they're not harming people. But you're harming people when you discriminate against them. Ha ha ha, gotcha, BTFO, right? It's like I spent like half of the video addressing that exact concern, but he never got there because he, was just rambling, or he wasn't actually listening to the full argument. Or I guess he did get to some of the arguments, but he would just hand wave it away by saying that businesses are not individuals, and for some
And they
reason
are.
that's a meaningful
They
distinction.
are. All
They're
institutions are
comprised of
individuals.
individuals.
Precisely. Yeah.
Yeah. Any regulation you put on a business is going to directly impact individuals, right? So, because they're just extensions of individuals. But so I made a response video just going through all of his claims he made and pointing out that I already responded to them, or any new claims I also responded to. And then I made a Twitter post like asking him to do a debate. And we had a debate a couple days after that, which was pretty good. It was respectful. And so, yeah, that's kind of a brief summary on what happened.
Absolutely. And now those subscribers, and not that it really matters, and I will say this, I think that numbers, even though you like numbers, Michael, and you understand numbers have a certain significance in the argumentative field, I think that numbers in general, human genius is not reduced to them. Human genius is, I think, it's a conglomerate of processes, and some of those processes I think are quite logical and mathematical. I think other processes are a little bit more ethereal, sort of metaphysical, almost sort of spiritual, things that we don't even understand ourselves. And so, I say this, numbers don't matter all that much, I don't think, but in a sense, they kind of do. So in that sense, particularly, how have you seen your subscriber rate play out? Because you also said in that video that you supported abortion, which a lot of folks did not appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually saw some comments saying, "Oh dear, you support abortion? I cannot support that. That's bad. I'm done. Bye." And it's it's so interesting how when you postulate gospels that confirm someone's pre-existing narratives, they will be with you. But the moment you interrupt that matrix of belief, they will run to the hills, they will curse your name, and they will do all sorts of things that you would not have supposed a rational, prudent person could do. It's that sort of curse, I think, of ideological and intellectual complacency, which destroys our potential as human beings. Answer the question before I go on a rant, because I can go on a rant. So you go, man.
Yeah, luckily, I think that the majority of my followers are not like that. I think that's because they are attracted to the type of values I hold, and the values I hold are inherently contrary to that type of thinking. But yes, some people, they only support people because it supports their agenda, right? There are lots of conservatives who are just as close-minded and ideological as the leftists they criticize.
Yep.
So, I had some people, saying, "Oh, I disagree with you, unsubscribed, bye." But most of the people I saw who disagreed with me on my explanation of abortion did so respectfully, and they remained subscribed. So they'd be like, I agree with everything you've said, but I disagree on the abortion part because I think that is actively harming the fetus because you are killing it. You're not just letting it die, which is a lack of a positive, but you are killing it, which is -1, right? So I'd say the majority of them expressed their disagreement in very respectful ways, and lots of them joined my Discord and wanted to have discussions with me. So I don't think my subscriber count has really dipped. It stayed around the same amount. I've lost some subscribers, but I've also gained some. So.
Good. No, I imagine so, because you think you made a very coherent argument.
Yeah.
Has anyone on the gay left or the gay right even tried to coax you or talk to you or attack you to having a discussion, or has this really just gone over with people who had a vague interest in
Mm,
social justice?
yeah, I don't think so. I think I've had I'm trying to remember if this individual expressed. I know they've done it with other of my videos. I think this person that I'm friends with over social media, who's openly gay, I think he was like, "Heck yeah, this is right," and I think he expressed his disagreement about like the Supreme Court's ruling. And I know I've had comments on my YouTube channel where they're like, "As a gay man, I don't think people should be forced to hire me," right? So, but I haven't been reached out to by any explicitly gay left or right wingers wanting to debate about this.
Yeah, and the argument I made in the Federalist about this, I basically said what you're trying to correct is outside of the purview of not only the Supreme Court, but any body, any institution of governmental bureaucrats. What
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to correct here is the heart. You're trying to morph the soul into something virtuous. But virtue, as you understand, is not cultivated by compulsion. Virtue is cultivated by necessity in the face of chaotic, substantially just important circumstances. It's virtue is unlocked, it's realized, sort of. And so
Yeah.
what the Supreme Court was trying to do, they were trying to compel virtue, which gives you a very necromentized, watered down, corrupted version of virtue, which leads to things like virtue signaling and sanctimony and crusading and things that have absolutely nothing to do with finding or seeking the truth or standing on that kind of moral courage for that which is right. So that's number one. Number two, not only were they trying to instill virtue into the heart of people who do not have it, i.e., people who are hateful in their heart towards people who simply want to have a sexual preference that is absolutely valid, legitimate, voluntary, legal, everything about it is fine from an ethical standpoint. Not only do they not have virtue, the Supreme Court was also trying to do something else which is quite pernicious. The Supreme Court was trying to control the means of production. This is going to sound crazy. Control the means of production from a socially acceptable standpoint. It reminded me very much of China's social credit system, where everything you do is predicated upon the whims of people in society, whatever the hell that means, the sort of
Yeah.
amorphous phrase. And so I basically argued that you cannot instill virtue by force, number one, and number two, you cannot justly, ethically instill it's like sort of sense of responsibility by trying to assume control of someone's property to use it for what you deem to be a just cause. That does not work whatsoever. And so what do you say to those arguments? Because they're in the same, of course, genre of what you were making, but I think they're a little bit more consequentialist almost, and that's odd for me because I'm not a very consequentialist kind of thinker. You know me; I'm a very
Yeah.
I'm deontological kind of thinker. But I think sometimes people need to hear, yeah, look, this is what this does. This is the sort of the result of the principle of input and output. So, what do you think of those arguments I just made?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's consequentialist. I'd say that's more so highlighting an ulterior agenda they
Okay,
have, which I guess would show that they're being consequentialist, right?
sure, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an intentional slippery slope, right? Because if you can prevent people from firing people and not hiring them because of reasons you deem arbitrary or insufficient, right? Obviously, they also deem like a minimum wage laws,
Yeah,
those to be bad, or
exactly.
they might deem, Jeff Bezos having more money than he needs. Like, oh,
As immoral,
you don't do enough work to justify having that
right?
much money based
All
on
that
my
nonsense.
subjective value judgment. So I'm justified in taking it. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's part of the like push for Marxism, anti-capitalism.
Why
I
do
think
you? Yeah, sorry, go on. Sorry, go
I
on.
was gonna say I don't think everyone's like that. I think some people
No,
just like I had this teacher that was a firm anti-Marxist, and he's one of my favorite teachers I've ever had. Love the guy, and he was talking to me about how like he thinks that we got into the discussion about anti-discrimination laws, and he just disagreed with me. He was like, well, once you go into the public, you need to treat them fairly. And so like I was asking him why, and he was like, oh, yeah, no, I see your reasoning now. Because it based on the principles he agreed with me on, like liberty, he realized, oh, wait a second, anti-discrimination laws violate that. Even though he
precisely.
grew, but the problem is he grew up in a society where racism and discrimination were seen as so taboo, and for good reason, that he just assumed those laws were good.
Precisely.
I think there's a lot of people who aren't, just Marxists with an agenda, but they're those types of people who
Right,
they
and-
just follow the narrative.
And sometimes the right will overblow the idea of cultural Marxism, and the Marxists trying to kill us. Sometimes they will scapegoat that, and I'm not trying to be one of those people. But a lot of times, especially on this particular issue, there is a sort of Marxian ethic that is being pushed into the dialogue that if you do not agree with my subjective value premises, you are a terrible person. So it's funny. Here's what they're doing.
Mhm.
They are using subjective premises to make objective conclusions.
Yeah,
To say
yeah.
that someone is a bad person, you have to have a consistent standard for that. But yet that standard cannot flow logically correctly without being corrupted from a subjective premise. You
Right.
see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When you have an input that is subjective, I'm not entirely sure you can get an objective conclusion. Can you?
No, you can't. The consistency between the input and the output will be objective, right? Because like
Right.
consistency
Yeah,
is
obviously, yeah.
objective.
The form
But-
is objective, yeah.
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 But yeah, no, I mean, your argument is only as strong as its weakest link in the chain
Right.
of argumentation.
Right.
So if even one of the chains is, well, because I feel like it, well, then the conclusion is as good as, well, because I feel like it.
Yeah, precisely. And so, you bring up the issue of association when you had that professor who basically was taking that position, not because it was logically argumentatively sound, not because it was cosmically true, only because he had seen things and those things had compelled him to discuss. And that's fine. I'm happy it did. I mean, there were a lot of folks in the 70s and 60s and 50s that would have loved to have silenced my voice, and simply because I was black, and God forbid they knew I was gay, I would have been into me. So I understand why he was like that. But the issue of association is primarily why folks make these decisions in a political sense. It's a very rarely an issue of logic. The anti-discrimination laws are oftentimes seen as political victories against bigots, against sort of crazy zealots that want to establish, and this is not my words, nor do some people, a theocracy, people like that. And so some folks will simply say, on strategy alone, I support this because it is an affront to agendas that supposedly threaten my being. In my opinion, this is simply an outgrowth of a lack of realization of your individuality and a sort of tying your identity around your neck and just drowning yourself in it. That's what in my opinion, that's what that sort of idea is. Also, it shows a lack of moral courage, because if you're going to make a principled decision on the basis of a circumstance, not on the basis of principle, not only are you debunking and completely sort of debunking yourself and just completely and utterly not adhering to what principles actually should be, you're also just being completely inconsistent with what you say, can claim to believe. If you do claim to believe in principle consistency, that's my opinion. What do you think about that sort of idea that, since this idea is associated with person X, I have to be, or I have to be against, or I have to be for it?
Yeah, there's definitely that tribal element where it's like, oh, this is associated with a group I don't like, so I have to be against it. Like conservatives just instantly reject climate change, and liberals instantly affirm climate change, even though most people on both sides haven't looked into the science at all.
Precisely.
But I would say that a lot of this is, I term it caveman morality, because it's reflective of such type of like small-mindedness that caveman is like the best way to compare it, which is the reasoning is, you're doing this and I don't like it, so you can't do it. It's like those don't follow. That is such small-minded reasoning. And I'm not saying that they're unintelligent. It's just their moral system is intellectually pathetic.
Precisely.
So yeah, and that's what most people do. Not in every area, but in some areas, lots of people do that. Where they'll be like, I don't like racism, and so they look at the consequence and they say, well, I don't like the consequence, therefore let's prevent it. But they don't look at the principle and functions that allowed that to happen. So they'll look at, I don't like people being racist, let's ban it. Or, I really like the idea of free college, let's do it. They don't think about the means that would be required for the ends. So like an example is like, if a girl, hypothetically, let's say that a girl refuses to date me, I might not like that, consequence. But I understand that the principle that allowed her to do that is good. It should be there, which is liberty.
Yes.
Women should be allowed, and men, to choose who they date.
Yes.
Regardless of if I like the way they choose to do that and use their liberty, it's a good principle. So yeah, it's just backwards reasoning. It's the appeal to consequence fallacy. It's like religious people who they presuppose that God exists, and then they accept or reject evidence based on if that supports their conclusion. Or very radical atheists, like dogmatic atheists, they presuppose that God does not exist, and then they do the same thing.
You are lancing intellectual pretension in all of its forms right now. You are
I know
you are merciless and irrelevant. Irreverent. I love it. I love it.
Someone made a comment on my YouTube channel. It was pretty funny. It was like, how to offend everyone in 10 minutes.
You are just
Because
lancing these
on
people.
every side,
My Lord.
on almost every side, there are always, ideologues who commit these fallacies.
Yes. And and you consider yourself to be on the right a little bit, right?
I lean more towards the right, but I have plenty of beliefs that, like, I don't think there's anything inherently immoral about homosexuality, right? And that's
I'm happy you think that. Although, to be fair, I'm not entirely sure that is a right wing Pacific view.
Lots of right wings have it, but some don't.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
if you go over to Eastern Europe right now, or you look back at how the communist regime treated gays, it was not pleasant. Not pleasant
for sure.
Which was odd, because aren't they supposed to be about egalitarianism and community prosperity? It was odd. I don't know why they were such a regime of homophobia against those kind of people.
And that's why I don't call myself a conservative or right wing, because it's just a package deal. Right. Like I care about the truth, and I don't think either side has it 100%. So if I call myself a conservative, well, now I have to accept all of these other presuppositions that I might not hold.
Right.
It's a package deal, and I don't like package deals when it comes to truth.
Right. You want people to be able to, you don't want people to have to actually investigate what you believe, investigate the premises of your arguments to get to the core of your convictions. You want people to be able to just simply look at you and say, oh, you're a libertarian. Exactly. You believe this, X, Y, Z. Okay, done with you. And I hate that predictability element too. I abhor it. Because I'm like, well, I am a dynamic individual. I am someone who constantly evolves and changes throughout the years, throughout the moments. Even right now, from the start of this conversation, I have evolved into a more informed person by hearing the intonations of your voice box come out into the camera, hit your microphone, and go into my prefrontal cortex and bleed into my spirit. I am a fundamentally, cosmically informed person since the beginning of this call, and yet there are people who cannot conceptualize you outside of a box because they're in a box themselves. Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Isn't that funny? God, I could go on about that. I could go on about
and
that.
It's just part of that tribalistic thinking.
Yes.
Right? They want to be part of a tribe, and they want a tribe to be against.
And so, running our interview down, what would you say to someone who genuinely, in their feelings, has listened to this interview and has simply said, you know what? You're making all the logical assertions, but logic cannot account for everything. And, the livelihoods of someone could possibly be at risk here, even if the logic is on the side of the person who wants to put their livelihood at risk, or not in your logic, put the livelihood at risk. What do you say to that person who is still fundamentally convinced, because they are grounding their sort of assertions, not on necessarily emotion, but on the sort of consequences that could indeed come, and would certainly come, I do think, come from gay people being allowed to be discriminated against in the workplace? Because there would be consequences. There would be some folks who would say no, and there would be consequences to those actions as well. I mean, I think there would be a lot of folks who boycott them or do other terrible things that shouldn't be done to people in a free society, but it would happen. So there's consequences to everything. But what would you say to someone who's just fundamentally and morally not convinced?
So with the criticism of logic, I would say that they are attempting to use logic in their condemnation of logic, and so it self-collapses, right? Ever since I was a kid, statements like, well, truth isn't always the most important thing, right? There are things more important than truth. I always really disliked those statements. I could tell that they were very faulty, and I've been able to articulate it now, which is that they are making truth claims in an attempt to defeat truth, and that's why the statement feels so terrible to hear, because it's just inherently built into the logic of the statement contradictory. So that's what they're doing if they reject logic. You can't reject logic. You can't argue that anything is more important than logic, because you have to use logic and affirm its value in order to even do that.
Agreed.
So I would also say that, like, the libertarian framework I'm operating from, the point of that is that what you personally think is a good consequence doesn't matter, right? Like, you need to be able to respond to my argument that all people should be able to determine their own goals and desired consequences and follow it, because it's their own life. And if you accept that, you can't then make the argument that because you have a certain desired consequence, you get to infringe on liberty. And I don't know how you could reject that. I think that's a pretty easy argument to win that your life belongs to you, and there's no real reason why you should be able to control someone else if they're not harming you. So and I would just explain as well that they're engaging in the appeal to consequence fallacy, where they reject a principle that's evidently true because they dislike the conclusion it leads to. Now, again, they might be like, well, I don't like logic. It's like, well, then you can't make claims about what is true because those are inherently logical. And obviously there's always going to be people like that who are like, well, I don't care about all of your rational justification. I'm an egoist, like a sterner egoist. So I only care about my wants, my emotions. I'm an emotivist, just all these terrible ideas, right?
Sterner was foul.
It's like, well, yeah, there's always going to be people like that who admit that they're not logical and they're going to go with might makes right. It's like, well, that's why we have guns. That's why we have a government.
Right. Precisely.
If you can't be convinced, if when we give you the rational justification for liberty, you just hand wave it away because you don't like it, well, it's like, okay, well, looks like we're gonna have to force you with guns, with the government. Yeah, I'm not doing any calls to violence. I'm saying that like we should prevent people from harming each other, regardless of if they want to.
I agree. The way you said that was a little bit. I'm like, wow, force you with it. Michael is frisky. My Lord. No, but I think it'd be very interesting to see this argument go up against someone who is well endowed with the social contract philosophy. But I do think that if there is any argument that would be formidable against what you're saying, even though I entirely agree with your position, it would be the sort of Rousseauian social contract philosophy, and that theory has been developed for very, very many years. I think that now I think it's absolute bunk personally. I don't think I signed some invisible contract or whatever. I was never present for the contract, and my understanding is a contract is an agreement between individuals, between two or more individuals who are present to voluntarily sign it. So I didn't sign some amorphous, cosmically ordained contract, but I do think that the idea does have some basis in reality, and if someone were to try to challenge your case effectively, that could be one of the bases from which their argument springs from. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think the best way to try to defeat libertarianism is to argue that the framework of libertarianism allows for the violation of libertarianism. Right? Like there's this argument.
Yeah, sort of self-contradiction argument.
Yeah. One of my friends made the argument that, like, well, taxation is voluntary because you agree to pay it, right? Or it's like a contract.
Oh my Lord,
that sort of thing.
Oh my Lord.
Right? Or they'll be like, well, and if you don't agree, you can just leave the society. So like those are better arguments to make.
Better, they can still be beaten though, especially by you. Well, Michael, listen, I appreciate on a very haphazard note you coming on here to talk to me about your recent argument. I wish you the best of fortune, not luck. Luck is a lie. Fortune. I wish you fortune and goodwill with your future endeavors, and please keep us updated. Okay, dude?
For sure. And I would say, luck is good when you understand it, which is luck is preparation plus opportunity. So
I entirely agree. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to us. And as always, please stay pensive.